Now, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary are urging Iran to de-escalate tensions in the Middle East after an attack killed 3 American troops in Jordan. I'm now also joined by former Labour Defence Minister Bill Rammell. Bill, welcome to the show. Always a pleasure. So, as a former Defence Minister, you must be eyeing what's happening in the Middle East with a certain sense of trepidation, perhaps even the historical legacy of former wars in the Middle East. What's your feeling? Donald Trump waiting in today, saying we're heading towards World War III.
We cannot be heading towards World War III because we're talking about states that have potentially got nuclear weapons, and that would bring a nuclear conflict, which would be the end of humanity. And the fact that Trump is saying we're on the verge of World War III, I think demonstrates how much more dangerous the world would be if he returns to the White House. But the situation is really concerning. The escalation with Iranian-backed militias attacking American troops in Jordan, and whether they were Iranian-backed militias or directed militias is an important one. At the moment, I think they were backed, which means that it wasn't a deliberate Iranian-directed assault. Nevertheless, it is a real cause for concern. I think there needs to be a considerable response from the US, backed by the UK, backed by the EU. That will probably take the form of missile attacks on militia camps in eastern Syria or northwest Iraq. But it needs alongside that a diplomatic track. And that's why the US have been making clear they've got no intention to have a direct conflict with Iran. They don't want a wider Middle East conflict. And that's why Sunak and Cameron have come in today and said Iran needs to de-escalate the situation.
Do you think Iran will listen? I mean, they're not famed for being cooperative, especially if they're funding and supplying and arming the Houthi rebels at arm's length. We've already bombed a huge number of targets. That doesn't seem to have stopped them. In fact, they seem to be becoming emboldened by upping the ante and attacking American troops. And surely the Americans will have to respond in kind.
Well, look, I mean, there's no doubt Iran wants hegemony and control of the Middle East. And if you talk to people in the Middle East, and I've lived and worked in the Middle East, in Iraqi Kurdistan, there is loathing for Iran amongst the Arab states and amongst its peoples. So be in no doubt, Iran is a serious concern. But I don't think at this stage Iran does want direct confrontation. You know, they had the opportunity in Gaza to actually push Hezbollah to intervene from the north. They chose not to do that, and Hamas have been disappointed by that lack of Iranian action. And I think Iran does respond to pressure. So I think there needs to be a concerted pushback from the international community. There needs to be legitimate and proportionate response from the US, backed by us, backed by others, hitting those militia groups in the areas that I've talked about. But there needs to be that diplomatic pressure and push as well to try and avert this situation escalating out of control.
And Bill, how do you think this conflict would look, say, for example, if Keir Starmer were the Prime Minister? We have a Labour Party at the moment that seems very divided on the issue of the Middle East. Would that be a problem during times of conflict?
No, I think I actually think if you look at the history of conflicts, there is generally bipartisan agreement between the Conservatives in government and Labour in opposition, and vice versa. And I think that the stance that Sunak and Cameron are taking today of saying that, you know, there needs to be a response to what the militia groups have done, but there also needs to be pressure on Iran to de-escalate. Those are exactly the actions that a Labour government under Keir Starmer would be taking, and rightly so. Where you see a lack of cross-party consensus, you can see that coming in the United States, where there's now a growing gulf in foreign policy terms between the Democrats and the Republicans led by Trump. And I think that's a real cause for concern. OK, former Labour Defence Minister Bill Rammell, thank you very much for joining us on GB News.